Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you. Tonight's tale, That Damn Buzzing Sound, by Ariel Lowe. Over the past month, I had been hearing this intermittent buzzing sound. At first, I thought that I'd be able to tune it out, but it just became more obnoxious over time. It transformed into a constant vibrating noise in the back of my head. It was difficult to focus on anything. It became so bad that I had trouble sleeping, and it's beyond me how my parents never noticed it. You know what they say, though. You lose your hearing with age, so I wasn't surprised when they gave me confused looks. Tyler, my neighbor, heard it too, and I was relieved at that. It meant that I wasn't going crazy. He's actually the one who brought it up when we were in my bedroom playing video games one day. So, him at my side, I was determined to find the source of this noise. We searched my house first, and placed our ears all over the walls. The buzzing sound never seemed to become stronger or weaker, so then we checked outside. My original thought was that something was wrong with the air conditioning unit. If I was right, that would explain why the sound transferred throughout the entire house, but my theory ended up being wrong. We stood beside the thrumming unit, watching the gigantic fan spin around inside. The whole unit was vibrating, yes, but it wasn't the sound we were looking for. However, we realized that the buzzing sound was louder outside than it had been in my room. We searched my backyard up and down and stopped at the wooden fence surrounding the yard. We placed our ears to the fence and exchanged a knowing stare. The sound was coming from beyond the fence, and that was enough for the both of us. We climbed the fence and dropped easily to the other side. Now, the area beyond my backyard was filled with untouched forest. I'd been over my fence a few times when I accidentally kicked a soccer ball over, but not enough times to be interested in exploring. My parents, well, they always complained about there being poison ivy everywhere, and there was. We skirted around it and created a path without a problem. It was really bizarre, though. All we could hear was this buzzing sound, nothing else. I mean, we could just barely hear the leaves rustling and the sticks cracking beneath our feet. All the other sounds seemed absent. There weren't even birds singing. As we kept walking, the buzzing sound grew louder, and eventually we couldn't see my fence anymore. We stopped several yards from a cluster of trees covered in tumor-like growths. We just stood there staring at it, and neither of us could explain why they were there. They appeared like they were a part of the tree, as if the bark had bubbled outward in these strange formations. Trees can actually develop deformed growths. They're called burls, something that I learned in hindsight. Naturally, though, our first thoughts were to poke it, but both of us were too chicken to get any closer, so we grabbed rocks instead. It only took one toss. Tyler was a baseball player. The rock collided with one of the large growths, and upon contact, the growth exploded outward, and that sent chunks flying. Not even a second later, bees, thousands of bees, swarmed out of the opening and formed into a thick, undulating mass. Both of us screamed and ran. I'd never run faster in my life. The bees were hot on our heels, and I felt their stingers plunging into my arms, my back, my legs, my neck. I don't remember hopping that fence or how I arrived in my front yard, but I must have been screaming bloody murder. I stripped down to my underwear, and my mom began spraying me and the persistent bees with the garden hose. The icy, pressurized water didn't hurt as bad as the welts that formed instantly. I was ushered into the kitchen, and there Mom began meticulously removing the stingers with a pair of tweezers. She lost count of how many she removed from my body. I was only allowed to change into dry underwear since the stings needed to be iced. The swelling and the welts had been unimaginably painful, and now I understood how people can die from bee stings. I was forced onto the couch with ice packs positioned all over my body. The majority of the stings were on my back, so I laid on my stomach, and I must have passed out sometime later. I woke up the next day in the same position, and the ice packs had been removed. Mom refused to let me change into comfortable clothing until she inspected all of the welts. Thankfully, the swelling had reduced significantly since the previous day. Over a bowl of soup, I learned that my parents called an exterminator after the incident. Apparently, there had been bees angrily flying around our yard and some of the neighbors' yards. By that point, everyone on our street could hear the enraged buzzing. The exterminator arrived promptly and followed the trail of chaotic bees back to the nest. The man actually told my parents that it had been the largest colony he'd ever seen. He sprayed so many chemicals, he didn't want anyone near the area. Not that anyone wanted to go investigate for themselves. The whole situation made me feel like a complete idiot. How had I been so stupid? How had we been so stupid? My only consolation was that Tyler might have suffered just as bad as I did from the bee stings. I brought this up to my parents, and I asked how bad his injuries were. My mother gave me this petrified expression I'll never forget. There had been nobody behind me when I raced around the side of the house. She hadn't even been aware that Tyler had gone back there with me. I felt guilty, beyond guilty. Horrible images of Tyler being swarmed consumed me. I swore he'd been right beside me. What made me feel worse is that the exterminator never saw anyone when he went back into the woods. If Tyler had fallen behind, the exterminator would have known because he searched the area for nests. He would have found him. About a week after the incident, Tyler was still missing, so I decided to go search the area for myself, but I wasn't going unprepared. I grabbed a can of my mother's hairspray along with a lighter from my kitchen. If any of these bees were still kicking, I wanted protection. I hopped the fence and moved slowly through the forest, my right hand clenched tightly on the hairspray. The distance to the nest was much further than I remembered. I knew that I'd arrived when I heard a thick crunch beneath my shoes. I glanced down and felt a shiver run through my body. The entire surface of the ground was layered with bee corpses. I couldn't see the dirt or any grass, and in some areas the bees just piled on top of each other. I was on my last nerve when I approached the nests, trying my best to ignore the sickening crunches underfoot. I narrowed my eyes at the nest that we'd destroyed, and when I rounded the tree, the rest of the nests became apparent, nearly 10 times larger. I cautiously nudged one of the nests, which crumbled and revealed a thick wax and honeycomb. Dead bees trapped inside of the nest oozed through the opening, and it was enough to turn my stomach. I grumbled beneath my breath and began poking the nest with more confidence, watching more of the pieces fall to the ground. That's when I heard the buzzing return. My heart skipped several beats, and I stumbled backwards, almost landing in the disgusting ruin of dead bees. I sprinted back several feet and raised the hairspray and lighter, watching the nests from all angles. These bees could appear from anywhere. They must have formed their nests throughout the cluster of trees, and it was very possible that the nests extended down into the ground and beneath the roots. I bit my lip and waited for the swarm to appear like last time, but it never did. Instead, an odd and disturbing sight took me by surprise. I left the clearing filled with dead bees and stepped through the bushes, trying to confirm what I was seeing. My whole body quivered, and I wanted to call out. My voice failed me, though, and that might have saved my life. Not even 10 yards from me was Tyler, just standing there with his back facing me, and something was wrong. His movements were off. His body was twitching, seemingly involuntarily, and when he took a step, His posture was rigid, while his arms were locked in janky positions. Despite the horrible feeling in my gut, I wanted to call out to him. My concern quickly transformed into fear. Tyler turned and lolled his head to the side as if his neck were broken. He knew I was here, but he couldn't see me. His eyes were gone. 2 dark sockets stared back at me with bees crawling out of them. Sores layered his flesh, which had turned into gaping holes, and a viscous fluid was running down his chin. I was too scared to move. I only ran when Tyler began lumbering toward me, swaying back and forth and twitching. For the second time, I screamed and ran for the hills, trying to outrun the crashes coming from behind me. When I scrambled over the fence, I felt the wood scraping my skin, but I didn't care. I pounded on my back door crazily and slammed it shut once my mother let me inside. She didn't understand much of what I was saying since, of course, I was hysterical, but she gathered that I'd found Tyler's body in the woods. By the time the police arrived, they waited for me to calm down so I could explain what I saw. I was a mess, and they must have thought that I was nuts. They searched the area where I saw Tyler, but they didn't find him. Instead, they found his body yards upon yards away by a creek. Tyler had been reclined on his knees with his forehead against the ground, immobile and dead. I refused to ID him. I couldn't see those empty eye sockets again. When I recovered from the event, I wanted to know what had happened. I emailed the pathologist who had performed Tyler's autopsy and practically begged for answers. I needed a logical explanation for what I'd seen. He explained how they were going through routine procedure when they hit a minor roadblock. When they performed the Y incision, dead bees poured out of his body. That body had literally been bloated with them. His eyes were missing. His jaw was broken, completely unhinged. His teeth were gone along with his tongue, and the tongue was replaced with wax. The worst part was this. His organs were also gone. All of them. All that was left inside him was skeleton, muscles, and the tissues which seemed to be the base for the extreme amounts of honeycomb within his chest cavity. The pathologist's only theory was that the bees had cleaned him out, devoured his organs. But bees aren't carnivores, are they? See, there's a reason why bugs freak me out. Nasty little flying, too many leg having, butt stinging freakazoids. Stay scary, my wildlings, and make the most of your nights.